I have kept the secret for 15 years. I never told the police, I never told my family, and until now, I never told anyone what really happened that night. But the older I get, the more I realize that silence can be just as heavy as guilt, and I can't carry this anymore. 15 years ago, I lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Nothing ever happened there. The kind of place where the same cars were parked in the same driveways for decades, and the biggest news of the week was usually about someone getting a new dog or repainting their house. Then one night, everything changed. A woman named Claire Dawson disappeared. Claire lived only 2 streets away from me. She was 32, worked in a small bookstore, and people described her as quiet but kind. The kind of person who remembered birthdays and brought homemade cookies to neighbors during the holidays. The night she disappeared was a Friday. I remember it clearly because I had just finished a late shift at the warehouse where I worked. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I got into my car and started driving home. The streets were almost empty. As I turned onto Maple Street, I saw someone walking ahead on the sidewalk. At first, I didn't recognize her, but as I passed under the streetlight, I realized it was Claire. She was walking quickly, like she wanted to get home as soon as possible. A black pickup truck was parked about 20 meters ahead of her. At the time, I didn't think much about it, but something about the way the engine was running caught my attention. The headlights were off, but the engine was on, and someone was sitting inside. As Claire walked past the truck, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Everything happened very fast. He said something to her. I couldn't hear what it was, but I saw Claire stop walking. She looked confused, maybe even nervous. Then he grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away. For a moment, I froze. I was still sitting in my car across the street. My headlights were off, and the man hadn't noticed me yet. Claire tried to scream, but the man covered her mouth and pushed her toward the truck. I remember thinking that this couldn't be real, that something like this doesn't happen in a quiet town like ours. I should have honked the horn. I should have driven closer. I should have shouted, but I didn't. Instead, I just watched. Within seconds, he forced her into the passenger seat and got back behind the wheel. The truck drove away, and just like that, it was over. For a long time, I sat there in my car, staring at the empty street. My hands were shaking. I told myself that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe they knew each other. Maybe it was just an argument. But deep down, I knew the truth. The next morning, the entire town was talking about Claire Dawson. She hadn't come home. Her family reported her missing. Police cars began driving through the neighborhood, asking questions, knocking on doors. I watched it all happen, and I said nothing. At first, I told myself I would go to the police later, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into years. The case slowly faded from the news, but I never forgot that truck. I never forgot the man's face. About 3 years later, I saw him again. It was at a gas station just outside town. He was standing next to the same black pickup truck. For a moment, I thought about calling the police right there, but fear stopped me. If he had done something to Claire, what would he do if he knew I had seen him? So again, I stayed silent. 15 years have passed since that night. The case of Claire Dawson is still officially unsolved, but I know something the police never knew. I know the face of the man who took her. And the worst part is that if I had spoken that night, if I had simply called the police, Claire Dawson might still be alive today.
I never told anyone what really happened in that hotel. For years, I convinced myself it was just Something strange, something I misunderstood. But the truth is, I know exactly what I saw. 10 years ago, I worked the night shift at a small hotel on the edge of the city. It wasn't a fancy place, mostly travelers passing through, truck drivers, sometimes couples who just needed a place to sleep for one night. The hotel had 4 floors and about 60 rooms. But there was one room that was different. Room 317. When I first started working there, the manager told me something strange. He said that room 317 was not to be used. Not for guests, not for storage, not for anything. At first, I thought it was just being renovated. But weeks passed, then months, and the door stayed closed. One night, curiosity got the better of me. It was around 2 a.m. The lobby was empty, and the security cameras showed no movement in the hallways. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor just to check something. That's when I noticed something odd. The light in the hallway near room 317 was flickering. Not constantly, just slowly turning on and off. I walked closer to the door. At first, I thought I heard something behind it, a soft sound, almost like movement. But that made no sense, because the room was supposed to be empty. The door was locked, but the hotel master key could open every room. I stood there for a long moment, thinking about whether I should do it. Finally, I slid the key into the lock. The door opened slowly. The room looked normal at first. A bed, a table, a chair near the window. But the air inside felt strange, like the room had been closed for years. I stepped inside and turned on the light. That's when I saw it. The bed had straps attached to the sides of the frame, like something you would see in a hospital. And on the table next to the bed were several empty bottles and medical gloves. My heart started beating faster. None of this made sense in a hotel room. I looked around the room again. That's when I noticed something else. The carpet near the bed had a darker stain on it. Old, but still visible. I suddenly had the feeling that I shouldn't be there. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard the elevator doors open in the hallway. Someone was coming. I quickly stepped out of the room and closed the door just as the manager walked down the hallway toward me. He stopped when he saw me standing near room 317. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he asked one simple question. "What are you doing here?" I told him I was just checking the lights in the hallway. He looked at the door of room 317 for a long moment. Then he said something I will never forget. "Some doors stay closed for a reason." The next morning, I noticed something strange. Room 317 was gone. The number had been removed from the door. The door itself had been repainted, and when I checked the hotel system, the room didn't exist anymore. Officially, there were only 59 rooms in the building. A few months later, I quit that job, but sometimes I still think about that night, about the straps on the bed, about the stain on the carpet, and about the fact that someone went to great lengths to make sure that room never officially existed.
3 months after my mother died, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. At first, it seemed like a normal day. My sister and I were cleaning the old house where we grew up, sorting through boxes, photo albums, and things our mother had kept for decades. Most of it was ordinary. Old birthday cards, school pictures, letters from relatives. But in the back of my mother's closet, we found a small wooden box. It was locked. My sister assumed it was just jewelry and said we should leave it alone for now. but something about that box felt different. It looked old and worn, like it had been opened many times over the years. Later that night, when I was alone in the house, curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, and none of them were addressed to my father. I never planned to tell anyone this story. For most of my life, I believed the same thing everyone else in my family believed. I thought my childhood was normal. I thought my parents were just quiet people who didn't talk much about the past. But 2 years ago, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about my own life. It started with a box. My mother had passed away earlier that year, and my sister and I were cleaning out the old house we grew up in. Most of the things were exactly what you would expect. Old photo albums, kitchen utensils, letters from relatives we barely remembered. But in the back of a closet in my mother's bedroom, we found a small wooden box. It was locked. My sister assumed it was just jewelry and suggested we leave it alone, but something about it made me curious. The box was old and worn, like it had been opened and closed thousands of times over the years. Later that night, when I was alone in the house, I managed to open it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some were very old, written on yellowed paper, with dates going back more than 30 years. Others were newer, written only a few years before my mother died. But what caught my attention wasn't the letters themselves. It was the name on the envelopes. None of them were addressed to my father. Every single one was addressed to someone named Daniel Carter. At first, I thought maybe it was an old friend of my mother's. But then I opened one of the letters, and the first sentence changed everything. My son is growing so fast. I wish you could see him. My hands started shaking as I read the rest. The letter wasn't about a friend. It was about me. The more letters I read, the more confused I became. My mother had been writing to this man for years. In the letters, she talked about my birthdays, my school, the day I learned to ride a bike. She wrote about my life. But the strangest part was this. Every letter ended the same way. I hope one day you will meet him. For a long time, I just sat there in silence, surrounded by these letters. There was only one explanation that made sense. Daniel Carter wasn't just someone my mother knew. He was someone important, someone who should have been in my life. The next morning, I asked my sister if she had ever heard that name before. She hadn't. So I decided to do something I had never done before. I started searching. It took weeks, but eventually I found a record. A man named Daniel Carter had lived in our town many years ago. The record showed that he had moved away shortly before I was born. But the most shocking detail was something else. The address listed in the records was the same address where my mother had lived before she married my father. At that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. Daniel Carter wasn't just someone from my mother's past. He was my real father. For 30 years, I had believed that the man who raised me was my biological father. But the letters told a completely different story. According to the dates in the letters, my mother had met Daniel before she met the man I called Dad. Something must have happened between them, something serious enough that she continued writing to him for decades. But she never sent the letters. Every single one of them was still in that box, which meant Daniel Carter had probably never read them. I spent months debating whether I should try to find him. Eventually, curiosity won. I tracked down an old address connected to his name and wrote a short letter. I didn't tell him everything. I only wrote one sentence. I think you might know my mother. 3 weeks later, I received a reply. The letter was short, but the moment I read the first line, I felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I have been waiting my whole life to hear from you. We met a month later. Daniel Carter looked at me for a long time before saying anything. Then he said something I will never forget. You look exactly like your mother. That was the moment I realized something even more painful. My father, the man who raised me, probably knew the truth all along. But he chose to raise me anyway. And now I live with the strange knowledge that my life was built on a secret that almost no one knew. Not my sister, not my friends, not even the man I called father. Only my mother. And a box of letters that were never meant to be opened.